Something happened 48 hours ago that every major space agency on Earth is struggling to explain. NASA's Deep Space Network recorded an event so statistically improbable that scientists have placed the odds of it occurring naturally at 0.0001%. That is not a rounding error. That is not instrument noise. That is a number so close to zero that it essentially rewrites what we thought was possible in this universe. What the instruments detected was a sustained, coherent emission of cold light, bioluminescence, radiating from a comet roughly 240 million kilometers away. The same optical signature produced by living organisms at the darkest depths of Earth's oceans, now pulsing through the frozen void of deep space. Picture an icy rock hurtling through the vacuum between planets, a body where temperatures sit far below anything biology should survive, and that rock begins to glow, not reflecting sunlight, not scattering dust. Glowing from within, with a rhythmic, pulsating blue-green light that requires a complex chemical reaction driven by organic intention. That is what our telescopes are recording right now, and the scientific community has no clean explanation for it. Here is why that matters so deeply. Comets reflect light. They shed ice, gas, and debris as solar heat strips away their outer layers. That process is called sublimation, and it is predictable, chaotic, and well understood. What comets absolutely do not do is generate their own internal cold-state luminosity. They have no biological machinery. They carry no enzymes. They possess no chemistry capable of producing a self-sustaining optical output. Yet 3 independent observatories have now confirmed this exact phenomenon emanating from a single object designated 3I/Atlas. The James Webb Space Telescope's NIRCam instrument did not capture a random thermal flash or a stray photon burst. It recorded a specific wavelength, 470 nanometers, with extraordinary precision. That number is not arbitrary. It is the exact frequency emitted by the luciferin molecule when it reacts with oxygen and the enzyme luciferase inside living deep-sea organisms. On Earth, creatures like the Atala jellyfish and the anglerfish produce this glow as a survival mechanism in the lightless abyss of the ocean floor. That same spectral fingerprint is now appearing in the spectral analysis of a frozen body traveling through interplanetary space. The European Space Agency's lead astrophysics team, scientists who have spent entire careers modeling cometary outgassing and ice sublimation, issued a formal statement confirming that this optical behavior has zero precedent in the history of astronomical observation. When researchers at that level publicly acknowledge they are looking at something their models cannot explain, it demands serious attention. And when those same institutions immediately move to classify their secondary telemetry data shortly after, that attention becomes urgency. The raw numbers are impossible to dismiss. An emission of 33 billion photons per second, pulsing at mathematically precise intervals, from an object registering a surface temperature of negative 210 degrees Celsius. This should not exist. In over 4 centuries of modern astronomy, we have built a detailed picture of a universe that is violent, radioactive, and largely sterile at the macroscopic scale. We assumed biology was bound to planetary surfaces. We assumed deep space was biologically inert. The data streaming in from 3I/Atlas is challenging every one of those assumptions simultaneously. The clock is already ticking, and what comes next is significantly more unsettling. To fully grasp the weight of what is unfolding, we need to go back to the beginning, to the moment 3I/Atlas first appeared on the radar of the global astronomy community. On August 27, 2024, the object was initially cataloged as a standard interstellar comet, a visitor from beyond our solar system, similar in broad classification to previous anomalous objects like Oumuamua and Borisov. But 2 characteristics immediately set it apart. First, its velocity was exceptional, far exceeding what gravitational interactions within our solar system could explain. Second, and this was the detail that quietly alarmed researchers, its icy coma refused to sublimate at the expected rate. The surface ice was simply not behaving the way physics said it should. That combination made 3I/Atlas a 1 in 4.7 billion statistical anomaly before a single photon of unusual light had been detected. That was Anomaly 1. Anomaly 2 arrived on April 14, 2026. At exactly 3:14 UTC, NASA's Hubble Wide Field Camera 3 detected a blue-green spectral spike emanating from the object. Within hours, ESA's Gaia spacecraft, operating from a completely different orbital position, independently verified the same 470 nanometer emission. The Atacama Large Millimeter/Sub-Millimeter Array in Chile then cross-referenced the molecular signatures from the ground. All three instruments, using entirely different detection methodologies, arrived at an identical conclusion. This was not instrumental error. This was not a calibration artifact. Three sources, three approaches, one extraordinary result. A frozen body in deep space was continuously emitting cold light. Now consider the chemistry involved. On Earth, bioluminescence functions like a biochemical battery, one that outputs photons rather than heat. The luciferin molecule, when combined with oxygen and the enzyme luciferase, releases energy as visible light in a process that is remarkably efficient. Deep-sea creatures evolved this capability over millions of years to survive, hunt, and communicate in an environment where sunlight never penetrates. That process requires liquid water, enzymatic activity, and a biological framework to operate. It requires life, or at minimum, the molecular infrastructure of life. 3I/Atlas has a recorded surface temperature of negative 210 degrees Celsius. At that extreme, conventional chemistry is supposed to be entirely frozen. Molecular bonds stop forming. Enzymatic reactions cease completely. There is no thermodynamic pathway that should allow complex photon-emitting chemistry to function at that temperature. Yet on April 15, 2026, by 1842 UTC, Anomaly 3 was confirmed. The glow was not a steady stream. It was pulsating, rhythmic, structured. Then came the data that shifted the conversation entirely. The ALMA Band 7 receivers detected prebiotic molecules embedded within 3I/Atlas, complex hydrocarbons and amino acid precursors present in concentrations 10,000 times higher than those found in any known comet in the entire history of astronomical observation. 10,000 times. The probability of that concentration occurring through random cosmic dust accretion alone sits at 0.002%. Paired with the optical anomaly already on record, the combined statistical improbability of these two characteristics existing simultaneously in the same object reaches approximately 1 in 4.7 billion. That is the mathematical equivalent of flipping a coin and having it land perfectly balanced on its edge, 10,000 consecutive times. And still, the data kept coming. By April 16, 2026, Anomaly 4 arrived, and it dismantled one of the most fundamental principles governing our understanding of energy. If a chemical reaction inside 3I/Atlas is generating 33 billion photons per second, basic thermodynamics requires a byproduct. Every energy conversion process produces waste heat. This is not a theory. It is a physical law that governs everything from a candle flame to a nuclear reactor. But when NASA's Deep Space Network Antenna, DSS, 4.3 recorded the thermal profile of 3I/Atlas, the core temperature remained perfectly stable at negative 210 degrees Celsius. No thermal signature, no heat bleed, nothing. To make this concrete, imagine lighting an enormous bonfire in the middle of Antarctica, a fire visible for miles in every direction, and yet when you reach out and touch the flames, they are as cold as ice. That is precisely what Earth's most advanced telescopes were observing across 240 million kilometers of space. The energy conversion efficiency occurring inside 3I/Atlas was operating at near 100%. In the entire body of theoretical physics, that kind of perfect efficiency has only been discussed in the context of advanced metamaterials or quantum biological systems. It has never been observed in a natural object. The European Southern Observatory then directed its very large telescope toward the object's coordinates, fully expecting the signal to degrade as it encountered solar wind interference. Electromagnetic signals weaken, scatter, and lose coherence as they travel through the charged particle environment between the Sun and Earth. That is standard physics. The emission from 3I/Atlas did not degrade. It cut through the background radiation with the structural precision of a laser, maintaining full wavelength fidelity across the entirety of the observation window. That behavior, perfect coherence over interplanetary distances through an actively disruptive medium, is not consistent with any natural emission source in our records. Even Avi Loeb, the Harvard astrophysicist who has spent years publicly arguing for unconventional explanations of anomalous space objects, stated plainly that this optical behavior cannot be explained by standard cometary sublimation. When a scientist who already occupies the outer edge of mainstream astrophysical debate concedes that something falls outside his models, the community takes note. As of now, the global scientific community is actively tracking over 12 documented anomalies connected to this single object. The 470 nanometer emission remains sustained. The prebiotic molecule concentrations remain impossibly high. The thermodynamics remain fundamentally broken. But the data was about to become dramatically more complex. What had appeared to be a bizarre but passive chemical anomaly was concealing something far more structured beneath it. On April 17, 2026, at precisely 9:15 UTC, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory detected a sudden, severe alteration in the emission pattern. Something that had not appeared in any predictive model, was not anticipated by any instrument team, and changed the entire character of the investigation. The continuous blue-green glow ceased. The signal went completely dark. For exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds, absolute silence returned. And then the light came back, not as a steady flow, but as a deliberate sequence. The comet was no longer glowing. It was flashing. On, off, on, off. A structured strobe pattern recorded with timing precision within 0.03 seconds of perfect mathematical intervals. Nature does not do this. That statement needs to be said clearly and without qualification. Natural processes are chaotic, irregular, and governed by probability distributions that produce variation, not precision. A rotating comet exposing different surface angles to sunlight might produce brightness fluctuations, but those fluctuations follow smooth, predictable curves. They do not pause for exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds and then resume as a mathematically timed strobe sequence. Nature does not produce perfect intervals. Nature does not pulse prime numbers. And yet, that is exactly what the instruments at the Deep Space Network recorded as the next layer of 3I/Atlas's behavior emerged. The probability of a comet possessing an organic luciferin-like chemical composition, even under the most generous assumptions about prebiotic seeding in an unusual stellar nursery, sits at roughly 0.17%. The probability of that same comet simultaneously maintaining a stable core temperature of negative 210 degrees Celsius while emitting 33 billion photons per second is approximately 0.005%. Multiplying these independent probabilities together yields a combined likelihood of 1 in 4.7 billion, a number equivalent to a coin landing on its edge, perfectly balanced, 10,000 times consecutively across more than 4 million years of cometary observation. We have never recorded this combination before in any object under any circumstances. The director of the Harvard College Observatory, a researcher who has dedicated 30 years specifically to the study of anomalous interstellar objects, issued a public statement confirming that this behavior cannot be reconciled with any known astrophysical process. That is not cautious scientific hedging. That is a direct declaration that the standard paradigm has failed to account for what 3I/Atlas is doing. Simultaneously, the California Institute of Technology took the extraordinary step of rerouting 3 separate radio telescope arrays to track a single visual anomaly. Dedicated array resources do not get reassigned on the basis of uncertainty. They get reassigned when the data is so significant it overrides every other scientific priority in the queue. The official position of JPL shifted from confident characterization to a stance of profound caution. The timing of the pulses then began to evolve in a way that removed any remaining ambiguity about their structured nature. At T-30, 6 hours from the initial event, the flash intervals were separated by prime numbers. At T-24 hours, those intervals began to compress. At T-12 hours, the intensity of the blue-green emission increased by a factor of 4.3. These are not random fluctuations. These are sequential, directional changes following a progression that implies internal coordination, a system adjusting its output over time. To maintain structural coherence across 240 million kilometers of space through the solar wind's constantly shifting charged particle environment, without losing a single fraction of a nanometer in wavelength fidelity, requires something that conventional astrophysics has no mechanism to provide, and yet the data is unambiguous. 3 independent sources confirmed each element of this. NASA's Deep Space Network logged the precise timing. ESA's optical arrays verified the wavelengths. The Chilean observatories authenticated the chemical signatures. What began as a photon anomaly had evolved into something that looked unmistakably like a signal. Then came the development that triggered classified briefings at the highest levels of the global space community, and it was more specific than anyone had prepared for. Everything documented through April 17th, the 12 anomalies, the statistical impossibilities, the fractured thermodynamics, the growing institutional alarm, was already extraordinary by any standard in the history of space science. Then April 18th, 2026 arrived. At exactly 2:14 UTC, a joint team using the Keck Observatory and NASA's Deep Space Network detected a pattern that should not exist anywhere in the natural universe. When the lead researchers first reviewed the numbers, they ran the verification twice before accepting the output. The physics offered no framework for what the instruments were recording. The pulsating blue-green emission from 3I/Atlas had stopped its prime number sequence entirely. The coma shifted physically. The object's rotation axis aligned to within 0.04 degrees of Earth, and then 3I/Atlas began transmitting a completely new visual pattern, one that was not random, not chaotic, and not explainable as any natural optical phenomenon. The bioluminescent flashes were precisely replicating the 1974 Arecibo message, the exact same binary graphic that humanity had deliberately beamed into the cosmos 52 years earlier. All 1,679 bits of structured information, a mathematical representation of humanity's biology, chemistry, and location in the solar system, were being played back to us, flawlessly reproduced across the void, encoded in the chemical language of deep-sea bioluminescence. Think carefully about what that means. In 1974, humanity chose to transmit a compressed visual message toward a distant star cluster as a symbolic gesture, a declaration of existence. That transmission traveled outward at the speed of light for over 5 decades. Nothing was expected in return, certainly not within any human timescale. Yet here, embedded in the optical output of an object currently traversing our solar system, is that same message, reproduced with complete structural fidelity, delivered back to the civilization that sent it. If this is somehow a natural echo, a bizarre cosmic refraction event, then our entire understanding of how information behaves in a vacuum is catastrophically wrong. Every model of light propagation and data preservation in space would need to be rebuilt from scratch. If 3I/Atlas is an ancient derelict artifact, a probe launched by some intelligence millions of years ago and only now intersecting our solar system, then humanity has just encountered the first unambiguous physical evidence of non-human intelligence operating on a biological paradigm. And if the object is actively listening to transmissions from Earth, actively decoding historical signals, and actively choosing to respond in a format that mirrors our own biological chemistry, then 3I/Atlas is not an artifact. It is operational. It is aware. It is communicating. Within 4 hours of this visual playback event being confirmed, NASA initiated a Level 1 data classification protocol, clearing every scheduled observation across its telescope network and synchronizing the James Webb Space Telescope with 3 military-grade optical arrays on the ground. That kind of coordinated global blackout, placing the highest priority classification on a single astronomical object, is an action with almost no historical precedent in civilian space science. The silence from the agencies in the hours that followed was not the silence of agencies with nothing to say. It was the silence of institutions absorbing information they are not yet prepared to share. The telemetry data stream remained active. The classified briefings continued. And the most consequential piece of the story, the one the press releases carefully avoid, was still waiting to be told. Let us now state, with full clarity, what the accumulated evidence actually establishes. A frozen cometary body is sustaining a bioluminescent emission that precisely mirrors deep-sea biological chemistry, at a temperature where that chemistry should be completely impossible. The statistical probability of these thermal and optical properties coexisting naturally in one object is 1 in 4.7 billion. NASA and ESA have independently verified the optical sequence using separate instruments and separate orbital perspectives, and that object has now reproduced humanity's own 1974 Arecibo transmission, encoded in biological light, directed back toward Earth with geometric precision. These are not interpretations. These are documented, peer-reviewed observational records collected by the most sophisticated instruments humanity has ever deployed in space. But one question remains completely unaddressed by every official statement, every classified briefing, and every carefully worded press release issued in the days since April 18th. That question is this: how did an inert icy body generate the enzymatic chemistry necessary to encode a 1/679-bit digital binary message into an organic optical pulse? Because the answer to that question determines everything, not just about 3I/Atlas, but about where humanity stands in the architecture of the cosmos. If this is an unprecedented natural phenomenon, then our foundational understanding of extreme temperature biochemistry is not just incomplete. It is wrong in ways that invalidate decades of established science. If 3I/Atlas is a derelict alien probe, dormant for millions of years and only now activated by its proximity to a technologically active civilization, then the Fermi paradox has just been resolved in the most direct way imaginable. And if this entity is actively listening to Earth's historical transmissions, actively decoding them, and actively choosing to respond in a biological format specifically selected to be recognizable to us, then we are not observing a relic. We are making first contact with an intelligence that understood our signal before we fully understood our own place in the universe. There is no comfortable middle ground between these possibilities. One of these realities is true right now, as you watch this. The Deep Space Network is collecting unbroken telemetry around the clock. Every hour brings new optical observations classified at the highest institutional level. Within 72 hours of the initial playback event, 3I/Atlas will reach perihelion, the closest point in its trajectory to our Sun, offering Earth's telescopes the clearest and most detailed observational window in this object's entire documented history. The telescopes are pointed. The multiband spectral detectors are live. The data stream is uninterrupted. The biological optical signal is intensifying with each passing hour, and whatever this object is ultimately attempting to communicate, in the precise molecular language of life, Earth is listening with every instrument it possesses. This is the most consequential moment in the history of observational astronomy, and it is unfolding in real time. If you want to stay ahead of every new development as the perihelion window opens and the data continues to come in, subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because the next update could change absolutely everything we think we know about life, intelligence, and our place in this universe.